You hear that word recession everywhere, right? It's on the news, it's in conversations, and it usually brings this kind of feeling of uncertainty. But what does it actually mean when the economy hits a rough patch? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break it all down for you, from what causes a recession to what it really means for you and me. Let's get into it.
I mean, it's the question on everybody's mind, isn't it? Especially when things feel a little shaky out there. You've got pundits, politicians, even your neighbor chiming in with their take. And all this uncertainty is exactly why we need to get to the bottom of what a recession truly is, and just as importantly, what it isn't.
And look, this isn't just some idle chatter. Check this out. A Wall Street Journal survey asked over 70 economists, and they put the probability of a recession in the next year at 61%. When you see that kind of expert consensus, you know that understanding the mechanics of a downturn is more important than ever.
Okay, so every good investigation has to start with getting the facts straight. Before we can dig into the causes and effects, our first job is to nail down the definition. What exactly are we talking about when we say the word recession?
So you've probably heard that old rule of thumb, right? A recession is 2 straight quarters where the GDP goes down. And, while that's often the case, the official call here in the US actually comes from a group of economists at the National Bureau of Economic Research, or NBER for short. They use a much broader definition. They're looking for 3 key things: depth, diffusion, which just means the slump is spread out across the economy, not just in one spot, and duration. They're analyzing everything from income and employment to retail sales to get that full picture.
And this is a super common point of confusion, so let's clear it up. A recession is not a depression. A depression is way, way more severe and lasts a lot longer. Think of it like this. A recession is a painful but, relatively common storm that might last for months. A depression, like the Great Depression back in the 1930s, is like a once-in-a-generation hurricane that just goes on for years.
All right, so we've got our definition locked down. Now it's time to play detective. If a recession is the crime, then who are the culprits? What kind of events or conditions can actually push an entire economy into a nosedive? Let's go investigate the usual suspects. So when you boil it all down, economists usually point to 3 main culprits. First, you've got these sudden, out-of-the-blue shocks to the economy. Second, you can have an economy that gets too hot, and policymakers have to step in and cool it down, sometimes a little too much. And third, you have the drama of a bursting asset bubble, which can set off a whole financial crisis. So let's kick things off with a sudden shock. The oil crises in the 70s are a perfect case study. In 73, when OPEC put an oil embargo on the US, prices literally quadrupled. And since oil is an ingredient in almost everything we do, that shockwave just rippled through the entire economy and triggered a 16-month recession. Then, boom, it happened again in 79 after the Iranian Revolution. It just goes to show you how vulnerable an economy can be to these big external events. Okay, on to culprit number 2, an economy that's running way too hot. You see, when demand starts growing too fast, inflation can really take off. So the Federal Reserve's job is to kind of tap the brakes by raising interest rates. That makes it more expensive to borrow money, which should cool things down. The goal? A soft landing, where inflation comes down without crashing the economy. But it is a very delicate balancing act. If they hit those brakes too hard, you get a hard landing, and they end up causing the very recession they were trying to avoid. And that brings us to our third suspect, and this one's a biggie: bursting asset bubbles. This is what happens when the price of something, like stocks or, say, houses, gets inflated way beyond what it's actually worth. We all remember the 2007-2008 housing crisis, right? When that bubble popped, it didn't just hurt homeowners. Because so much of the financial system was tangled up in those mortgages, it triggered a full-blown crisis that led to the longest downturn we'd seen since the 30s, the Great Recession. So, we've defined the downturn and we've identified the usual suspects. But now, let's talk about the real-world impact. What does a recession actually feel like for people and for businesses? And how long does that pain usually last? And this is so important, because a recession isn't just some abstract number on a chart, right? It has real, tangible consequences. Businesses see their revenues drop, so they cut back on investing. That leads to hiring freezes and then layoffs, which makes unemployment go up. And with less income and less confidence, people spend less, which, well, it just slows the economy down even more. It becomes this nasty cycle that can be really tough to break. But, and this is a really important piece of perspective to have, while recessions are absolutely painful, they are a temporary phase. According to the NBER, the average length of a US recession since World War II has been about 11 months. History shows that, eventually, the economy recovers from every single one. Now, what's fascinating is how much that average can hide. I mean, look at this. You had the Great Recession, which was this long, painful 18-month slog. But then you look at the COVID-19 recession in 2020, it was one of the shortest ever, just 2 months. But boy, was it a sharp and deep drop. It really shows you that every single downturn has its own personality. So when a recession does hit, it's not like we just have to sit back and take it. We aren't helpless. There are responders who can be called in to help. So for the final piece of our investigation, let's look at the tools that governments and central banks have to fight a downturn and get the economy back on its feet. Basically, you've got two main toolkits. On one side, you have fiscal policy, which is controlled by the government. We're talking about things like boosting spending on infrastructure, cutting taxes, or even sending out stimulus checks to directly put money into people's pockets. And on the other side, you've got monetary policy. That's managed by the central bank, the Fed. Their main tool is lowering interest rates to make it cheaper for people and businesses to borrow and spend. Both are trying to do the same thing, fire up demand and get the economy moving again.
So at the end of the day, these ups and downs, expansions and recessions, they're just a natural, inevitable part of the business cycle. They come and they go. So fearing the next one isn't really the most productive thing we can do. The real question isn't if the cycle is going to turn again. It's how all of us, as individuals, as businesses, and as policymakers, can be better prepared for it when it does.